Ladies and gentlemen, to give us a much deeper insight into the legend of Jim Hand, who better but of course renowned harness racing historian and now Hall of Famer Alan Parker to reflect. First of all, congratulations. Your induction, none more worthy, but we're now talking about another figure, an historical figure in the sport that you love so much, one who raises great curiosity. He was self-made, self-reliant, never married, never had children. Thus, very, very few members of the Hand family, of course, remain to speak about Jim Hand himself. In a sense, Al, a mythical but a highly influential figure.
Oh, terrific horseman in an era of terrific horsemen. I mentioned earlier with Brittany about you'd go researching something and you uncover another story, and Jim Hand falls into that category. I've got to say, my wife, Dot's got to put up with this all the time. I go researching one thing and I get sidetracked on others.
She's a patient woman, Dottie.
Absolute lovely girl. I don't know how she puts up with me, I really don't. But Jim Hand was, like John mentioned in that prelim, he was a part owner of the Mount Charlotte gold mine, and anyone who's been to Kalgoorlie knows exactly where that is. It's right in the middle of town. And I read today they've taken out about 1,800 kilos of gold out of it, so it's pretty wealthy. But he invested all that back into horses at a time when trotting needed horses in WA. There weren't the breeders here. In fact, the very first Australian trotting stud book, there's only one West Australian breeder in it. Pretty famous bloke, of course, a bloke called Noel Brazier, who was in charge of the 10th Light Horse. So, but without people like James Brennan and Jim Hand, we wouldn't have had the horses to hold racing in WA.
Jim Hand effectively was a visionary.
He
man
was
before his time.
Very much so, Darren. He was passionate about trots to the point where someone wrote a newspaper article saying he was getting out. He'd had a quiet period, and as any horseman will know, you do have quiet periods where nothing seems to go right. And he vehemently attacked that newspaper for even suggesting that he'd be getting out. He said, "I've gone through all the tough times. Why would I want to get out now?" He said, by 1936, the WATA will be out of debt. Mind you, he said this in 1928 before the Great Depression hit, so he wasn't quite spot on, but yeah, he was passionate and very generous person. Those horses that came here, if you ran into someone who was looking for a horse to race, he'd sell them one. He was that sort of person.
Jim Hand obviously was a trainer of his time. Prize money was pretty poor.
Yep.
And they had to survive on the punt. He was a punting trainer and he didn't mind taking bookies to the cleaners.
He was one of a whole heap of them at that period of time. The stake money in the 30s and 40s, and both codes, both harness and gallops. Ask Jack Cockle how good his old man was at setting one up for a plunge. Like, it was almost like sport to those guys. The bookie's up there, I'm going to have a crack at you.
Did it for practice.
Did it for practice, yeah. And they were damn good at it too. Like the two derbies he won with Hilda Grattan and co, Jim Hand first up to win a derby, and I don't care what era it is, that's remarkable, absolutely remarkable effort.
Really, one of the founding forefathers of harness racing, I think Jim Hand would be best described these days. And we're going to also, with other inductions this evening, through the likes of Andy Sheehan and also to be inducted later, Albert Cockram. There is a link with Jim Hand, every thread, isn't there, through that particular era?
Yeah, they were all had links. Like Andy Sheehan came to Perth with a horse called Globe Derby. He trained horses for A.G. Hunter of A.G. Hunter Cup fame, and he moved to Perth, and the first bloke to hold up his hand to offer him a stable was Jim Hand, and Andy became Jim Hand's stable driver. No better driver has ever Been a lot of drivers as good as Andy Sheehan, not too many better. Dapper little bloke. I've got a photo at home of him working a horse at the Wacker track with the scoreboard in the background. A fascinating photo. But Jim Hand, he was only too happy to help, but he had a real soft spot for his horses. Like his dying words to his brother were, look after Hilda, referring to Hilda Grattan, who was clearly his favourite horse. And he had several horses that were badly hurt. He refused to have them put down. He nursed them back to health, and even if they couldn't race again, he'd send them to a stud and in the country, and a remarkable horseman.
Al, Jim Hand wasn't there to witness his last winner though, was he?
No, he died a matter of 2 or 3 days before the horse won, and his name appears in the results as the trainer, but it should have actually read the estate of Jim Hand. I don't know what would have happened if the stewards had tried to take action against him. They might have had a bit difficult. But Andy Sheehan...
well, at least he was still warm when the horse won, so...
But yeah, he will never be forgotten in my view. He was remarkable, absolutely remarkable. And it got to the point where bookmakers would almost duck for cover when they saw him coming, and he had to organise others to look after the plunge for him.
Jim Hand was indeed a visionary of the sport, ladies and gentlemen, a champion trainer from another time in our industry, in our history. And tonight we salute him for that vision and for his magnificent training exploits as well. Please welcome Jim Hand to the WA Racing Hall of Fame and thank once again Alan Parker.